I mentioned limping a couple times, and I think it's a very powerful tool. Like I said, it had been, I think it's been utilized quite a bit in Hyper Turbos, but it's something that turbo players, it's only probably, 20 to 30% part of the game where it could be like super effective, so it's not really touched on as much. It's kind of like when I used to play 6-max and full ring a lot, when you get to heads up, and I consider myself back then, I probably wasn't good, but compared to everybody else, I thought I had a pretty big edge heads up, because they just, you don't get to heads up very often. If you're playing 6-max, it might be like 30% of the time. So, obviously the first thing we want to consider if we're considering limping is the depth of play. Now, I usually don't start limping until it's about under 30 big blinds, but there's definitely some players that, say for example, they have a 3-betting frequency over 25 or 30%, I'll start limping hands at 75 big blinds, 60 big blinds, because first of all, I think it tends to tilt them quite a bit, and second of all, you're keeping the stack to pot ratio much higher, which is in your favor when you're in position, as we touched on before. I mean, it's a pretty basic fundamental. So, what aggressive 3-betters often try to do is that they try to build big pots and make you uncomfortable, and they're decreasing the your positional advantage by lowering the pot to stack ratio when they're out of position. And I really do try to mix it up, because one thing that a lot of people try to do when you start limping is that they'll just start raising out of position, and honestly, I kind of like look forward to that happening, because you kind of know that they're going to be overplaying a lot of hands or just putting themselves in a lot of marginal situations. Now, talking about the downsides of limping, obviously when we limp, we don't give ourselves the opportunity to win the pot pre-flop, which is where a lot of our money is going to be coming from, especially against recreational players. So when you limp, you really have to be active on the flop and trying to take down a lot of pots. But the thing is that if you're playing against somebody, say, who's flatting 40% and is 3-betting 30%, you're not going to be winning the pot that much pre-flop. So I think that downside can be neutralized quite a bit if you're against a very aggressive player. The thing I like most about limping is what I call the small pot proclivity. It's that people tend to fight for smaller pots less often, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because poker is just a big game of odds, and if you're getting, whether the pot's 100 chips or 500 chips, when you're betting, you're getting the same odds to win that amount of money. So and I think especially in this era of multi-tabling, people just kind of view small pots as just not worth going after, it's too much of a headache or whatever. And because of that, people, I think, fold way too much on the flop. They don't fight back enough. They just let you bet and take it down, or maybe they'll call once and then they fold. So I like to use that as an advantage against people who multi-table a lot. People are just kind of lazy players, as I would describe them, where they're not going to have much of a check raise frequency. They're not going to have much of a check call frequency unless they have a hand. And the fact of the matter is, something like 30% of the time, or 70% of the time, they're not going to have a hand. So I think it's a great little tool that you can add into your game to throw off your opponents.